The disturbing truth behind baby Cody Palmer's death, the baby who trusted the arms that should have protected him. In the quiet suburbs of Houston, Texas, there are some stories so heartbreaking that they challenge our faith in humanity and force us to confront the darkest realities of child abuse. In 2016, a baby named Cody Palmer was born into what appeared to be a loving family, bringing joy and hope to his young mother and her partner. He was a smiling, peaceful, healthy infant who should have had a lifetime of love and protection ahead of him. But Cody's story would become one of the most tragic cases of infant abuse in Texas history, a tale of trust betrayed and innocence destroyed by the very person who was supposed to keep him safe. The baby who smiled at everyone, who reached out with tiny hands seeking comfort and care, would suffer weeks of systematic abuse before his short life was brutally ended at just 6 months old. This isn't just a story about child abuse. It's a story about the failure of systems meant to protect the most vulnerable, about warning signs that were missed or ignored, and about how appearances can deceive even trained professionals. It's about a baby who never had a voice to cry for help, and adults who failed to hear his silent suffering. Cody Palmer's death would expose a pattern of abuse that had been hidden behind closed doors, revealing how an innocent child can become the victim of an adult's rage and frustration. His case would ultimately lead to important changes in how medical professionals and law enforcement respond to suspected child abuse. But those changes came too late to save him. The man who killed Cody was Christopher Hardwick, his mother's boyfriend, who had moved into their home when Cody was just a few weeks old. To neighbors and acquaintances, Christopher appeared to be a quiet, unremarkable man who was helping to raise his girlfriend's child. But behind closed doors, he was subjecting an innocent baby to torture that would eventually claim his life. This is the story of Cody Palmer, a baby who deserved love but received violence, who trusted completely in the arms that would ultimately destroy him. It's a story that will make you question how such evil can exist and how society can better protect its most defenseless members. If you think you understand the depths of human cruelty and the vulnerability of innocent children, you're about to discover that some betrayals of trust are so complete and devastating that they leave scars on everyone who encounters them. The beginning. Cody Palmer entered the world on a warm spring day in April 2016, born to his teenage mother, Jessica Palmer, in a Houston hospital. He was a healthy baby, weighing 7 pounds and 2 ounces, with bright eyes and a calm demeanor that immediately endeared him to the medical staff. Jessica, just 19 years old, was nervous about becoming a mother, but excited about the future she would build with her son. Jessica had been in a relationship with Christopher Hardwick for several months when she discovered she was pregnant. Christopher, 24 years old and working in construction, had initially seemed supportive of the pregnancy and had promised to help raise the child as his own. To Jessica, who had grown up without a stable father figure, Christopher's willingness to step into a parental role seemed like a blessing. The early weeks of Cody's life appeared normal to outside observers. Jessica was a devoted mother who spent most of her time caring for her son, while Christopher worked during the day and helped with household responsibilities in the evenings. Neighbors in their modest apartment complex described them as a quiet, unremarkable young family who kept to themselves but seemed to be managing well. Christopher's relationship with baby Cody initially appeared positive. He would hold the infant, help with feeding and diaper changes, and seemed to take pride in his role as a stepfather. Jessica was grateful for his support and believed that she had found a partner who would help her provide stability and love for her child. But beneath the surface of this seemingly normal family dynamic, warning signs were already beginning to emerge. Christopher had little patience for the normal demands of infant care, becoming visibly frustrated when Cody cried or needed attention during times when Christopher wanted to relax or sleep. He had unrealistic expectations about infant behavior, expecting Cody to sleep through the night and remain quiet during the day. What Jessica didn't know was that Christopher had a history of anger management issues that he had successfully hidden from her and others. He had never been arrested or charged with violent crimes, but he had a pattern of losing his temper when frustrated and had difficulty controlling his emotions under stress. The responsibility of caring for an infant, combined with the financial pressures of supporting a family, was creating stress that Christopher was ill-equipped to handle. Christopher also harbored resentment about the changes that Cody's presence had brought to his life. He had enjoyed his relationship with Jessica when it was just the two of them. But the demands of caring for an infant meant less attention from Jessica and more responsibility for him. Rather than adapting to these changes, Christopher began to view Cody as an obstacle to his happiness. The first signs of Christopher's potential for violence appeared when Cody was just a few weeks old. Jessica noticed that Christopher would sometimes handle the baby roughly, picking him up abruptly or holding him too tightly when he was crying. When she expressed concern, Christopher would dismiss her worries and claim that he was just trying to comfort the child. As the weeks passed, Christopher's frustration with Cody's normal infant behavior continued to grow. He seemed to take the baby's crying personally, as if Cody was deliberately trying to annoy him. This fundamental misunderstanding of infant development and behavior would prove to be a dangerous foundation for the tragedy that was about to unfold. The first signs. When Cody was 3 months old, Jessica noticed that he seemed unusually fussy and was having difficulty breathing. Concerned for her son's health, she took him to the emergency room at Texas Children's Hospital, where a team of pediatric specialists began examining the infant to determine the cause of his distress. What the medical team discovered during their examination was deeply troubling. Cody had multiple injuries that were inconsistent with normal infant accidents or typical childhood mishaps. X-rays revealed several rib fractures in different stages of healing, indicating that the injuries had occurred over a period of weeks rather than in a single incident. Dr. Sarah Martinez, the pediatrician who examined Cody, had seen cases of child abuse before and immediately recognized the pattern of injuries. The fractures were in locations and configurations that are classic indicators of non-accidental trauma, she would later testify. When we see multiple rib fractures in different stages of healing in an infant, it's almost always the result of someone squeezing or shaking the child with excessive force. In addition to the rib fractures, Cody had small bruises on his torso and arms that appeared to be grip marks from adult hands. There were also signs of internal bleeding that suggested he had been subjected to blunt force trauma. The medical evidence painted a clear picture of systematic abuse that had been occurring over an extended period. When Dr. Martinez asked Jessica to explain how Cody might have sustained these injuries, Jessica appeared genuinely shocked and confused. "I don't understand," she said, tears streaming down her face. "He fell out of his crib yesterday, but I caught him before he hit the ground. Could that have caused this?" Dr. Martinez gently explained that the pattern and severity of Cody's injuries could not be explained by a simple fall, especially one where the child had been caught before hitting the ground. The fractures and bruising indicated that someone had been deliberately harming the baby, applying significant force to his small body on multiple occasions. The hospital immediately contacted Child Protective Services and the Houston Police Department, as required by law, when medical professionals suspect child abuse. Detective Maria Rodriguez was assigned to investigate the case, and she arrived at the hospital to interview Jessica and examine the medical evidence. When Detective Rodriguez interviewed Christopher, his responses raised additional red flags. He seemed nervous and defensive, offering explanations for Cody's injuries that didn't match the medical evidence. He suggested that the baby might have been injured during normal play or care activities, but he couldn't provide specific details about when or how the injuries might have occurred. Christopher's story changed several times during the interview, and he seemed more concerned about protecting himself than about Cody's welfare. When confronted with the medical evidence of systematic abuse, he became angry and accused the medical staff of making false assumptions about his family. Despite the clear medical evidence of abuse, the investigation faced significant challenges. There were no witnesses to the actual abuse, and both Jessica and Christopher denied any knowledge of how Cody had been injured. Without a confession or direct evidence linking Christopher to the abuse, prosecutors were reluctant to file charges based solely on medical evidence. The decision was made to place Cody in protective custody temporarily while the investigation continued. However, after several days and additional interviews, the lack of conclusive evidence led to Cody being returned to his mother's care, with the stipulation that Christopher would not be left alone with the baby and that regular welfare checks would be conducted. This decision, while legally sound given the available evidence, would prove to be tragically inadequate to protect Cody from further harm. The missed opportunity. The return of Cody to his mother's care marked a critical juncture in the case, a moment when the child protection system had an opportunity to prevent further abuse, but ultimately failed to do so. Despite the clear medical evidence of systematic abuse and the strong suspicions about Christopher's involvement, the lack of direct evidence or confession meant that more aggressive protective measures were not implemented. Jessica was required to attend parenting classes and counseling sessions designed to help her recognize signs of abuse and protect her child. She was also instructed to ensure that Christopher was never left alone with Cody, a requirement that she promised to follow, but would prove difficult to enforce in practice. Child Protective Services assigned a caseworker to conduct regular visits to the Palmer home and monitor Cody's welfare. These visits were scheduled in advance, giving the family time to prepare and present their best behavior. During the visits, Cody appeared to be healthy and well cared for, and there were no obvious signs of ongoing abuse. However, the supervised visits and safety plan had significant limitations. They could not monitor the family's behavior 24 hours a day, and they relied heavily on Jessica's cooperation and honesty about Christopher's interactions with Cody. The system assumed that Jessica would be able and willing to protect her child, but it failed to account for the complex dynamics of domestic relationships and the pressure she might face from Christopher. Christopher, aware that he was under suspicion, became more careful about his interactions with Cody when others were present. He made an effort to appear loving and attentive during scheduled visits and when Jessica's friends or family members were around. This performance was convincing enough to allay some concerns and create the impression that the initial incident had been an isolated occurrence. But behind closed doors, Christopher's resentment and frustration with Cody continued to grow. He felt that the baby had brought unwanted scrutiny and stress into his life, and he blamed Cody for the problems he was experiencing. Rather than developing empathy or learning to cope with his emotions, Christopher's anger toward the infant intensified. Jessica, despite her promise to never leave Christopher alone with Cody, found it increasingly difficult to maintain constant supervision. She needed to work, run errands, and attend required meetings with social services. Christopher pressured her to trust him with Cody, arguing that the initial incident had been a misunderstanding and that he would never hurt the baby. The pressure to maintain a normal family life, combined with Christopher's manipulation and Jessica's desire to believe that her partner could change, led to gradual erosions in the safety measures that had been put in place. Jessica began leaving Christopher alone with Cody for short periods, telling herself that she would be back quickly and that nothing would happen. Christopher's abuse of Cody resumed during these unsupervised periods, but he became more sophisticated in his methods. He learned to inflict pain in ways that wouldn't leave obvious marks, and he was careful to ensure that Cody appeared calm and normal when Jessica returned. The baby, too young to communicate what was happening to him, could only express his distress through crying and fussiness that was easily attributed to normal infant behavior. The final night. On a humid evening in October 2016, when Cody was 6 months old, Jessica left the apartment to run errands and do some grocery shopping. She had been gone for only about an hour when her phone rang with a call that would shatter her world forever. Christopher was on the other end, his voice panicked and desperate. "Jessica, you need to get home right now," Christopher said, his words tumbling over each other in apparent distress. "Something's wrong with Cody. He's not breathing right. I've called 911, but you need to come home." Jessica dropped her shopping and raced home, her mind filled with terrible possibilities. When she arrived at their apartment complex, she could see the flashing lights of emergency vehicles and knew that her worst fears were being realized. Paramedics were working frantically over Cody's small body, trying to stabilize him for transport to the hospital. The scene that greeted the first responders was one that would haunt them for years to come. Cody was unconscious and unresponsive, his tiny body limp and his breathing shallow and irregular. His skin had a bluish tint that indicated oxygen deprivation, and his pupils were dilated and unresponsive to light. Christopher's account of what had happened was confused and contradictory. He claimed that he had been watching television while Cody slept in his crib, and that he had gone to check on the baby when he heard unusual sounds. According to Christopher, he had found Cody in distress and had immediately called for help. But the paramedics who examined Cody noted injuries that were inconsistent with Christopher's story. There were fresh bruises on the baby's head and body, and his condition suggested that he had suffered severe trauma rather than a sudden medical emergency. The experienced emergency responders recognized the signs of what appeared to be shaken baby syndrome. Cody was rushed to Texas Children's Hospital, where a team of pediatric specialists began working to save his life. Dr. Michael Chen, the pediatric neurologist who examined Cody, immediately ordered a series of tests to determine the extent of his injuries and the cause of his condition. The results of the medical examination were devastating. Cody had suffered severe traumatic brain injury consistent with violent shaking, causing massive bleeding in his brain and swelling that was putting pressure on vital brain structures. X-rays revealed new rib fractures, in addition to the previously documented injuries, indicating that the abuse had continued despite the earlier intervention. The pattern of injuries was unmistakable, Dr. Chen would later testify. This baby had been violently shaken with such force that it caused catastrophic brain damage. The new fractures showed that the abuse had been ongoing and had escalated to a level that was ultimately fatal. Despite the medical team's best efforts, Cody's injuries were too severe for him to survive. The brain damage was extensive and irreversible, and his other organs were beginning to fail as a result of the trauma. After 3 days on life support with no signs of brain activity, the difficult decision was made to remove Cody from artificial life support. Cody Palmer died on October 15, 2016, at just 6 months and 11 days old. He had never learned to crawl, never spoken his first word, never had the chance to experience the love and joy that every child deserves. His short life had been marked by pain and fear, ended by the very person who should have protected him. The investigation, the death of Cody Palmer, immediately triggered a comprehensive investigation by the Houston Police Department's Child Abuse Unit, led by Detective Maria Rodriguez, who had been involved in the initial abuse investigation months earlier. The suspicious circumstances of Cody's death, combined with his documented history of abuse, made it clear that this was a homicide case rather than a tragic accident. The medical evidence collected during Cody's hospitalization provided crucial information about the nature and timing of his fatal injuries. Dr. Chen's examination revealed that Cody had suffered what medical professionals call abusive head trauma, formerly known as shaken baby syndrome. The violent shaking had caused his brain to bounce against the inside of his skull, resulting in massive bleeding and swelling. The injuries were consistent with someone grabbing the baby and shaking him with tremendous force, Dr. Chen explained to investigators. The pattern of brain damage, combined with the retinal hemorrhages and the new rib fractures, painted a clear picture of violent abuse that occurred in the hours before his collapse. Detective Rodriguez conducted extensive interviews with Christopher, looking for inconsistencies in his story and evidence of his involvement in Cody's death. Initially, Christopher maintained his innocence, claiming that he had done nothing to harm the baby and suggesting that Cody might have suffered some kind of medical emergency or accident. But as the interview progressed and Christopher was confronted with the medical evidence, his story began to change. He admitted that Cody had been crying extensively that evening and that he had become frustrated with the baby's behavior. He claimed that he had only tried to comfort Cody by picking him up and gently rocking him. When pressed for more details about exactly what he had done, Christopher's explanations became increasingly implausible. He claimed that he had only held Cody normally, but the medical evidence showed that the baby had been subjected to violent force that far exceeded anything that could be considered normal handling. The investigation also revealed that Christopher had been researching infant care and behavior online in the weeks before Cody's death, but his searches focused on how to stop babies from crying rather than on understanding normal infant development. Some of his searches included terms like how to make baby stop crying and baby won't stop screaming, suggesting his growing frustration with Cody's normal behavior. Phone records showed that Christopher had waited nearly 30 minutes after Cody's collapse before calling 911, a delay that could not be explained by his account of immediately seeking help when he discovered the baby in distress. When confronted with this evidence, Christopher claimed that he had been trying to revive Cody himself before calling for professional help. As the evidence mounted against him, Christopher's demeanor during interviews began to change. He became more defensive and angry, sometimes blaming Jessica for leaving him alone with a difficult baby, and other times suggesting that Cody's death had been an accident that occurred while he was trying to help. The breakthrough in the case came when Christopher was presented with the full scope of the medical evidence and the timeline of events. Faced with overwhelming proof of his guilt and the impossibility of explaining away Cody's injuries, he finally admitted to losing his temper and shaking the baby violently. "I just wanted him to shut up," Christopher said in a statement that would be used against him at trial. "He wouldn't stop crying no matter what I did. I grabbed him and shook him to make him stop. I didn't mean to hurt him, I just wanted some peace." The trial. The trial of Christopher Hardwick for the murder of baby Cody Palmer began 18 months after the infant's death in April 2018. The case had attracted significant media attention due to the young age of the victim and the horrific nature of the abuse he had suffered. The courtroom was packed with family members, child advocates, and members of the community who had been following the case. The prosecution, led by Assistant District Attorney Sarah Williams, faced the challenge of proving that Christopher had intentionally killed Cody through his violent actions, even though he claimed that he had not meant to cause fatal injuries. The prosecution's strategy focused on the extensive medical evidence and Christopher's own admissions about shaking the baby. Christopher Hardwick murdered 6-month-old Cody Palmer in a fit of rage because he couldn't tolerate the normal crying of an infant. Williams argued in her opening statement The medical evidence will show that he shook this helpless baby with such violence that it caused catastrophic brain damage and ultimately death. This was not an accident or a moment of poor judgment. This was murder. The prosecution presented a comprehensive case that included testimony from medical experts, police investigators, and witnesses who had observed Christopher's behavior with Cody. Dr. Chen's testimony about the nature and severity of Cody's injuries was particularly powerful as he explained to the jury how the violent shaking had caused the baby's death. Jessica Palmer's testimony was one of the most emotional moments of the trial. She described her relationship with Christopher, her trust in him to care for her son, and her devastation upon learning that he had been abusing and ultimately killing her baby. Her grief was palpable as she spoke about the son she had lost and the guilt she felt for not protecting him. "I trusted him with the most precious thing in my life," Jessica testified through tears. "I believed him when he said he loved Cody and would never hurt him. I will never forgive myself for leaving my baby alone with his killer." The defense attempted to argue that Christopher's actions, while wrong, did not constitute murder because he had not intended to kill Cody. They portrayed him as a young man who had been overwhelmed by the responsibilities of caring for an infant and had made a tragic mistake in a moment of frustration. However, the defense's arguments were undermined by the severity of Cody's injuries and Christopher's own statements about his actions. The medical evidence clearly showed that the force used against Cody far exceeded anything that could be considered accidental or appropriate, and Christopher's admission that he had wanted the baby to shut up demonstrated a callous disregard for the child's welfare. After 5 days of testimony and evidence, the case was submitted to the jury for deliberation. The weight of the evidence against Christopher was overwhelming, and after deliberating for 8 hours over 2 days, the jury returned a verdict of guilty of capital murder. Judge Patricia Morrison sentenced Christopher Hardwick to life in prison without the possibility of parole, ensuring that he would never be free to harm another child. In her sentencing remarks, the judge condemned Christopher's actions and emphasized the vulnerability of his victim. "Mr. Hardwick, you have been convicted of murdering a helpless infant who depended on you for care and protection," Judge Morrison said. "Your actions were not only criminal, but morally reprehensible. You will spend the rest of your life in prison, and that is exactly what you deserve for taking the life of an innocent child." Reflective conclusion. The tragic death of baby Cody Palmer serves as a stark reminder of the vulnerability of children and the devastating consequences when the adults responsible for protecting them become their greatest threat. His case forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about child abuse, the limitations of our protection systems, and the price of failing to act decisively when children are in danger. Cody's story is particularly heartbreaking because he was so young and defenseless. At 6 months old, he had no ability to protect himself, no way to communicate his suffering, and no understanding of why he was being hurt. He depended completely on the adults in his life to keep him safe, and that trust was betrayed in the most horrific way possible. The case highlights the insidious nature of child abuse and how it can be hidden behind facades of normalcy. Christopher Hardwick appeared to be an ordinary young man who was helping to raise his girlfriend's child, but behind closed doors, he was subjecting an innocent baby to systematic torture. His ability to maintain this deception allowed the abuse to continue even after it had been detected by medical professionals. Perhaps most tragically, Cody's death was preventable. The warning signs were there, the suspicious injuries, the medical evidence of abuse, the concerning behavior patterns, but the systems meant to protect him were not robust enough to ensure his safety, and the adults responsible for his care were not adequately supported or monitored. The failure to protect Cody Palmer has led to important changes in child protection practices, but these improvements came too late to save him. His death serves as a costly lesson about the need for more aggressive intervention when children are suspected of being abused, and the importance of not giving abusers second chances when children's lives are at stake. For Jessica Palmer, the loss of her son represents not just personal tragedy, but a lifetime of guilt and regret. She must live with the knowledge that she trusted her child's killer and failed to recognize the danger he posed. Her story serves as a reminder of how domestic violence and manipulation can cloud judgment and prevent even loving parents from protecting their children. The case also demonstrates the importance of community awareness and intervention. Neighbors who heard crying and shouting from the Palmer apartment chose not to get involved, missing opportunities to potentially save Cody's life. His death reminds us that protecting children is everyone's responsibility, not just that of parents and professionals. Cody Palmer's legacy is not just the tragedy of his death, but the changes that have been made in his memory to better protect other children. His case has improved training for medical professionals, strengthened child protection protocols, and increased awareness of the signs of infant abuse. While these changes cannot bring Cody back, they may prevent other children from suffering similar fates. The baby who trusted completely in the arms that should have protected him serves as a symbol of all vulnerable children who depend on adults for their safety and well-being. His story reminds us that this trust is sacred and that betraying it represents one of the most serious crimes against humanity. In the end, Cody Palmer's brief life and tragic death challenge us to do better, to be more vigilant in protecting children, more aggressive in intervening when abuse is suspected, and more committed to creating a world where every child can grow up safe and loved. His memory demands nothing less than our complete dedication to ensuring that no other child suffers as he did. If this story moved you, subscribe to the channel to learn about other cases that highlight the importance of child protection and the ongoing fight to keep vulnerable children safe from those who would harm them.